Hey everyone, Aaron here. Okay, folks, we'll go ahead and get kicked off this afternoon. It's about a minute after 7. Like I said, my name is Aaron Sumrall. I'm the Director of Research and Education Outreach for Pig Brig Trap Systems for some of y'all that may be new to the webinar setups. And tonight we've got Anna Maria. Anna Maria heads up our marketing efforts and so forth. And then there with it also is Margaret, and Margaret is the head of everything that comes through customer service that we just get the unbelievable number of fantastic reviews on. So another one that's joined us tonight that I don't know if she'll turn her video back on, that's been out for a couple of months on definitely an excusable absence with maternity, has joined us again. I don't know if Brooke will or turn her video back on and introduce the newest member of the Pig Brig family. So where you at, Brooke? Sorry, I'm going to throw you out and see what happens here. So while we're seeing what Brooke's going to do, we're going to, there we go. If y'all look there on the side there, Brooke has joined us back, started back with us on Monday, and she is definitely starting that young man off the right way. So he'll be catching pigs before you know it. So anyway, what we'll do tonight is we're going to go ahead and get things kicked off just like what we normally do. Is for those of y'all that are old hat at this, you know the method to the mayhem. But what we'll do tonight is make sure that you know how to use the chat features on the platform that you're using tonight. So if it's at the top bar or the bottom bar or whatever, if you look and find that chat feature, that's the way that we're going to communicate tonight. We're going to respond to questions that are posed through that chat. So anytime through the process of this webinar and you got any questions, throw those in that chat, and Anna Maria and Margaret will be watching that. And then whenever we get to the end of it, then we will start fielding those questions and just keep them coming. We'll stay here as long as what we need to. So what we want to do to make sure that you understand and are comfortable with using that chat feature, what we'd like for you to do is just the same way we do every month rather, is I'm going to ask you a question, and in the response, I want you to put that response in the chat. So with the question tonight, what I want you to tell us in that chat feature is what is the primary response, or what is the primary usage of the property that you are trapping on. And that may be recreation, it may be livestock, crops, it may be golf courses, who knows, just what is the primary focus of the property that you're trapping on. So if you could take a minute there and fill that in, and that way we know that you see how to find that chat feature and can correspond with us accordingly. But what we'll do tonight is we're going to start go ahead and kick into the content, and before we do that, the slide that's up there now, I want to make sure that you draw special attention to that, because it's something that we started back in June with Dr. Carl Grimsey from Germany, talking about the African swine issue and response there in Germany. Every quarter, we're going to be doing something like what you see on the screen. What we started with Dr. Grimsey, we're going to continue that in September on Thursday, the 21st. Make sure that you notice the date change and the time change. So September 21st at noon Eastern. So for the rest of y'all that are in the chosen part of the country, that would be 11 a.m. So, and I knew I'd get some of those wrinkled eyebrows from the ladies on the East Coast, but anyway, it's going to be 11 a.m. on Central Time, noon on the East Coast. But what we'll have that night will be Dr. Mike Bodenchuk. Mike is the director of Texas Wildlife Services. And Mike's going to be talking to us about livestock threats as far as diseases, ecosystem concerns, so forth and so on. One of the things out there for you guys that are deer hunters, Mike will be talking about the correlation that's been drawn now that we have some pretty irrefutable data indicating how pigs are a contributor to the spreading of chronic wasting disease. So he'll talk more so about that on the 21st. He'll also be discussing some of those production diseases like brucella and things of that nature. And then also to be talking a little bit more about the African swine fever response in the United States. So that's going to be something that's definitely a want to attend. Same as it is on all the webinars. If you're not able to make it during the daytime for that that Thursday on the 21st. We will be recording it, so definitely come back and join us on the recording, listen to it, and if there's anything that we can help you out in following up on the questions, please don't hesitate to ask. So moving into this tonight, what we're going to be discussing tonight are environmental health concerns, and how those pigs have got their nasty little hooves in those environmental concerns, and what we need to think about moving forward with just the places that pigs definitely find themselves in, that they're still continuing to not be welcome there. So what we'll be focusing on tonight are what you see on the screen there. Some of the priorities we're going to highlight are going to be pertaining to the topsoil, mountain erosion, the wetlands, plant and animal communities, management infrastructure, and water and disease. So we'll talk about some of these things. Some topics we'll discuss under each of those highlights will be, I guess, brought back again and reiterated on in some other bullet points there. So it's just extremely important that we get some of the underlying focuses on this out there many times over. But when we start off talking about topsoil, I mean, that's where the good stuff comes from. If we didn't have a lot of topsoil and what we could grow things in, it would make it pretty tough for us to eat. So we need to think about topsoil being just an absolutely critical component to everything that we do. Whenever you think about that question that we had you answer at the beginning, what's the primary objective of the property that you're trapping on? I'm probably sure that nobody said that the primary objective is to maintain topsoil health. And that's something that we need to think about, because without that topsoil health and the functionalities of that, we're not going to grow too much of anything, whether that's a cow, a crop, or a big deer. So what we see in those topsoil concerns is whenever we have arid and dry environments, we can see that we could lose virtually all that topsoil in a very short period of time. Where I'm at is on the east side of Texas, just a couple of 100 yards basically from the Louisiana state line. But if you go to the opposite side of the state where I'm at in West Texas, if you would take $1 worth of dimes out of your pocket, so you got a 10 dimes, $1 worth of dimes out of your pocket, and stack them up on the table beside you like a stack of poker chips. If you look at the thickness of each dime that's on that table, 10 dimes on that table to make $1. To make $1 worth of topsoil out in that arid part of Texas takes about 1,000 years. So whenever you look at the thickness of each dime that you have setting on the table, that's about 100 years worth of Mother Nature's work to be able to put that topsoil in those arid environments. And then whenever we have bad management or pigs come in there and take out that ground cover, take out the process of creating that topsoil, literally through wind erosion or monsoonal moistures, we can lose 1,000 years worth of topsoil in just a very short matter of minutes. So whenever we think about that, in the conditions that we're facing right now in many parts of the central United States and in the South and where I'm at, is even though we got some deeper topsoils, we have to think about it is right now, it's been 9 weeks since I've seen a drop of rain at my house. And with that, we have lost a lot of that top cover, grassy cover, so forth and so on. And we are now coming into some of those, what you may find some more of those arid times, where if we got pigs that start causing us some situations there, it kind of gets down to that next bullet point. And that next bullet point being that we need to think about, it's going to increase the leachability of those soils. So if you think about the way soil profiles are put together, you're going to start out with the organic matter on the top, and it's going to progress through those different profiles depending on what part of the country you're at. But whenever we have a pig stick his snout in the ground and start messing things up, then we're going to change up the profile of that soil. And when we're starting to change up the soil profile, we're going to look at increased leachability of soil nutrients. So those of you out there that like to cut some really good, nice, pretty hay and feed some fat cows and things like that, whenever we thinking about fertilizer prices, that's probably one of those things. If you are in production agriculture and you start thinking about fertilizer prices, that's something that keeps you up at night. So when we think about that fertilizer hitting the ground to be able to do what we need to do in producing the crop, and we have pigs come through and they disturb or upset that soil profile, we've increased the leachability, and now your nutrients are finding themselves a pretty quick path on down into the deeper profiles. It's out of the reach of those root systems of whatever the crop is you're trying to grow. So when we think about that, is that, yeah, they may be out there and we may have some deeper ground, and you may be able to drive a T-post as deep as you want to in the ground without hitting a rock. But whenever we think of some of those old chisel-headed looking piney wood rooters that are out there, those things are built like a yard dart in my mind. And whenever you start looking at how deep they can really turn over that ground, they can sure enough change up your soil profiles in a very short period of time, and makes it tough for you in a number of ways. And that leads into the next thing that's down there is the increased prevalence of invasive and or unwanted plants. So I'm going to ask you guys and ladies that are out there that are in hay production, you're cutting hay for cattle, is whenever you have a set of pigs come through your pretty hay meadows and they decide they need to do a little cultivation for you out there, is it always your improved Bermuda grasses and your improved pastures that always recover those disturbed areas first, or is it your invasive or unwanted plants? And I know in my experience of cutting hay, it's never the desirable stuff that seems to find their way to back over the top of those disturbed ground. I mean, I don't understand in a lot of ways how that happens whenever we can get some of those sod forming Bermuda grasses to cover as quickly as they do. But whenever it seems to be in an area where pigs have disturbed that soil profile and increased that leachability, those grasses that depend on high fertility to be able to perform, the fertility is just not there in the soil. And where we have a lot of these invasive and unwanted plants, they are developed over centuries of time to establish themselves and to grow and to flourish on low fertility soils. And that's something that's a pretty good indicator when you walk onto a piece of property. If you've got some of these undesirable plant species, it's kind of a red flag out there that your soil fertility is probably not where it needs to be. So the other thing that's alters in there in those soil profiles in that topsoil range is the invertebrates or the larvae population. And what we talk about there is, yeah, those earthworms are some good guys out there for us. And whenever it's ground that they are finding themselves at the top of, and those pigs come through, we lose a lot of our desirable invertebrates and things like that, larval populations and so forth. So it's topsoil is something we need to critically guard, whether you're in an environment that's pretty arid, pretty rocky, or if it's in something that's in the deep south in the Bacon Belt where we've got some soils to work with. The other thing that keeps a lot of people awake at night is around the world is mountain and erosion and things like that. We see some of these concerns coming out of some folks that maybe in that California area, Hawaiian Islands, down in New Zealand, and things like that is mountains and erosion related to pigs. And typically what we see is that this is going to be something following a catastrophic event like a wildfire. Whenever we have fires go through an area, think about this in your past experiences, is whenever we have a fire go through an area, what are the first vegetative species to recover? The first vegetative species to recover typically are going to be your forbs. For those of us that are in wildlife, that's like the ice cream plants that are out there. The forbs for a cattle guy are the weeds. So either way, it's going to be something that for the pigs is going to be highly sought after, because those forbs are fast growing in that vegetative state. They're unbelievably high protein and digestibility. So whenever we have these mountainous sloped grounds that are following wildfires, yeah, that soil may be still somewhat held in place even after it's been denuded by a fire. But whenever a pig comes and sticks his snout in the ground on those heavily sloped lands looking for those forbs that are trying to reestablish that vegetative community there, obviously we're going to have a lot of soil disruptions and so forth, which then what we see following some of those wildfires in the seasons to come are some very heavy rainfall amounts. And whenever we see denuded ground that's been disturbed and so forth and so on with a lot of high level rainfalls, we end up seeing mudslides. That's just a given fact, and pigs are not helping that situation in any capacity. And then you ought to think about too is that whenever you're in mountainous terrain, it's always blowing up the mountain or down the mountain with regard to wind. And with that denuded and cultivated up, chopped up ground, we see a heck of a lot of wind erosion. Same thing on the previous slide, where those areas in more arid locations where this topsoil takes centuries to establish, wind erosion may be the complete issue there that they're looking at, not so much rainfall in removing those desirable topsoils. We also see a heck of a change in the regeneration of niche plants there. Those niche plants that are critically important on or critically depend on very specific environments to grow in and so forth. And many of these locations in these mountainous environments, they have microclimates that can change just by a matter of a few hundred feet in changes of elevation. Well, whenever those pigs come into those areas that are those microclimates and disturb a lot of those things, the regeneration of those niche plants that have evolved to be there gone, and they typically struggle to come back or maybe completely lost. So I know this is something that's very typical, tough to manage just because of the inaccessibility. I know there's a lot of efforts around the world that the only way that they can get traps into those areas then is to airlift them in with helicopter. The problem that we need to keep in mind is that it may be tough to get those traps in there, but it's one of those situations that if we're not managing those pigs and those tough to access points, that doesn't mean those pigs are going to stop the damage in those areas. They're going to continue to do what they need to do, and as land stewards, we just need to make sure that we can get there. So in those areas that's tough to get to like that, in those very uneven, sloped, and rocky grounds, that's a perfect setup for getting those pig brigs backpacked into those locations and chase those pigs up and down those slopes without having to worry about several hundred pounds of prefab panels. Also, we need to think about the altered water quality down slope. So if you look at that denuded ground on those slopes of those mountains there, whenever we get that situation up slope and we get those big downpouring rains, yeah, we may end up with that catastrophic mudslide. But even if it's just more incremental rain showers that come through there, we're going to definitely see an altered water quality down slope with the increased sedimentations and so forth and so on. Now we'll basically go from one extreme to the other. We talked about the mountains. We've talked about those heavy sloped elevations. Now we're going to get into the wetlands, and the wetlands is basically where you're going to find them is in tabletop flat situations where there's not a lot of slope to the ground, and that's specifically for the way that Mother Nature put that together is a filter, because in filtered situations, you want them to be pretty level, pretty flat to slow that water down to be able to filter out the things that you don't want progressing on down the flow. So whenever you think about those wetland areas, yeah, they're in some super flat areas, but they're in flat areas for the purposes of being that filter. So whenever we get pigs into those filtered wetland landscapes, we're going to see filtering ability decreased. And what we see in there is in those altered plant communities. And whenever we think about a wetland, typically we think about in those wetland areas a lot of grassy species. Those grassy species may be in matted forms and things like that, so they can slow that water down to make sure that those particulates settle out and fall to the bottoms. And when we see pigs get into those areas and those grassy areas where there's a pretty high sedimentation, there's typically going to be a lot of invertebrates. And when we get into those high populations of invertebrates and pigs know they're there, then they're going to really start to just completely destroy those grassy plants that are there for filtering capacities, and then open up that ground, which then typically is recovered and restored by woody species that produce a canopy. And when those woody species produce a canopy and shade out that ground, it's super tough for those desirable grassy species of a wetland to get reestablished. And then we start losing the functionalities of that wetland and increasing sedimentation into places that we don't want, whether that's in a brackish estuary or somewhere that could be cropland on the downside of it or something of that nature. So plant and animal communities are drastically altered in those areas where pigs get established. And unfortunately, this is where people believe in many cases that pigs are out of sight, they're out of mind, they're not doing any damage out in those places because people just really can't get there. Whenever there's probably one of the most inaccurate comments that we could ever think about is just because they're out of sight doesn't mean that they're not causing some pretty catastrophic changes. And the changes is predominantly in that water quality. So if we need to think about the water quality of a wetland, is if you watch any of the ways that wetlands function as they come in with some water with high levels of particulates on the upstream side, and then you look at the water on the downstream of the wetland and how it flows out, it may go in and it looks somewhat similar to chocolate milk, but whenever it comes out the bottom end of a functioning wetland, it is literally basically gin clear. It's completely cleaned out by what Mother Nature's put in place. But whenever we change these wetlands, we need to think about what it does to those aquatic species of plants and animals and so forth and so on, because whenever we have increased sedimentation in water quality or in water, as that sedimentation level increases, that dirty water is able to then hold more heat. Well, whenever you got that increased temperature holding ability of that water, the oxygen holding ability of that water plummets quickly. So whenever you have a low oxygen holding capacity in that water, what happens to your aquatic species, especially your fishes and things of that nature? It's not good. It's going to change up your complete aquatic species communities to those plant species to those that can tolerate that low level of oxygen, that high level of sedimentation, and increased temperatures as well. So overall decrease in wetland function whenever you get those pigs involved, and they can just be as happy as they want to be. It's not a big deal to them. They're going to find food. But for all those native species that depend on it, those migratory and residential species of birds and others that are out there, we see a lot of those flight paths change. We see a lot of those feeding and nesting locations change because of the wetland decrease in functionalities just brought about with pigs. So this is something very, very real. And even though it's in a kind of an out of sight and out of mind situation for those of y'all that are especially your duck hunters and may want to wonder where your ducks have gone over the past several years, that could be a very real possibility of what's happened to your ducks, as those pigs have destroyed that habitat, leading to the next slide that we have here. Regenerational changes in plant communities, and that's what we're talking about when we say whenever those desirable grassy species that we typically find in a wetland environment are removed or reduced, they're replaced by those woody forming vegetation species, and then canopies form and they can't get any light to the ground. No light to the ground equals no new grassy species to reestablish. Next thing on there means that if we have these nesting birds that rely on that specific environment to nest in with those grassy species and so forth, we've lost now nesting habitat in those areas that may still have a little nesting habitat, but a high pig population. We put the eggs on the ground for them, and that's seriously, they found a nest on the ground, and it's not a good prognosis for those eggs or for those chicks whenever we have that altered habitat, the lack of nesting habitat, so forth and so on. So nest loss is extremely high in areas that are experiencing extremely heavy pig populations. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a wetland. That could be anything that's a prairie environment where you're trying to establish quail that may have been compromised by whatever situation, or you're trying to enhance the population. If you got pigs, you've got challenges. So large animals want to avoid areas where high pig populations are. Folks, I'm telling you, this is something that I'm sure that if you've deer hunted for more than 2 seasons, then you've probably seen some changes in deer movements. And you think about what your pig movements have been and your observations, whether that be in person or on camera. Whenever pigs are high in an area, high populations of pigs in an area, the deer just assume move out of the neighborhood. They just don't like it when the bad neighbors move in, and they'll avoid an area. Just one, because they don't want the interaction with the animals. But then the other thing is, if we see that those last 2 bullets on the screen is the decreased food availability. Pigs come in there, and if there's not sufficient food above the ground for a pig, what's he going to do? He's going to stick his nose in the ground, and he's going to go down underground to get what food he needs or they need, and that's leaving more out of the mouths of a deer or a desirable species. And the competition for other resources is just phenomenal. We'll start seeing this. Some of these guys, that if you are hunting out in some of the places maybe further west in the hill country of Texas, or if you've got peaches, other fruits that are out there, and you start seeing an abnormal number of those fruits on the ground, and you kind of wonder why, put you a camera up and take a look at it. We've seen this many times, and this is a very real concern for people that are in peach production and production of other similar commodities, is that especially whenever those trees are not much bigger around than a baseball bat, they can get pretty heavily laden with a peach crop. And whenever those peaches get near that ripe stage, you'll see that those bigger hogs will be in those peach orchards pretty readily and literally bumping that tree with their body to dislodge those peaches to get those peaches to fall. So we have a heck of a lot of people that really need to watch their crops and the size of those trees. For those of us that get the opportunity to do a little hunting in the hill country or some other places around Texas or the country where those oak trees may be small, same situation. They may be the size of a baseball bat, but they can get pretty heavily laden with that fall mass production. And whenever those first few acorns start to hit the ground and those pigs realize it, they'll start doing the same thing and start bumping those trees with their body to dislodge any of those ripened fruits and expedite that drop of that fruit. So, and that again takes away from resources of native wildlife species that are out there. So shifting gear just a little bit on this is plant and animal communities with a different kind of a twist. We talked about the increased population and distribution of invasive plant species. That's going to be something that, whenever we think about livestock, we always think about making sure that we leave adequate stubble height of the grass that's on that landscape, that we don't have denuded land out there. The more grassy cover we can keep, the less weedy, or the less woody species coverage that we've got to think about. But whenever we think about the increased population distribution of invasive plants, is when we see that even though we may have managed that land to have that proper stubble height of the grass, and those pigs come in and remove that well-managed grass cover out of the way, we see those invasive species coming back up. See it a lot of times in many of the more western locations in pig environment with regard to like mesquite trees and things like that. We see that in the last couple of, I don't know, the last 6 or 8 months, in some of the conferences that I've attended, there is something that just absolutely blew me away. And I thought the first time I heard it, it was just because my ears weren't working. But then I heard it more times in very rapid succession. But my opinion, whenever early on, was that, well, at least one thing we don't have to worry about is the tree nesting birds being impacted by pigs. And lo and behold, if it hadn't been here recently in the last several months, that I've heard multiple presentations that suggesting that pigs are now actively decreasing the productivity of tree nesting birds. And I thought, this is crazy. How is this happening? And then it was explained perfectly well, and it made it make sense, is that if you got these tree nesting birds, many of these species are very, very much a niche species that have a very small range. They have to find everything they need in a very small area, which means, how do they feed their chicks? These tree nesting birds feed their chicks on insect communities. Those insect communities have developed themselves based on the vegetation that is there. So that native vegetation that's been there for centuries has had an insect community on it that has been developed over centuries. Whenever those plant communities are removed or significantly reduced by pig interactions, then those insects don't have anything to feed on. Well, whenever those insect communities start to fall and start to diminish themselves because of the lack of necessary plants, then you have to think about, well, then what's going to happen to the tree nesting birds with regard to feeding their chicks. And several of those papers have drawn some pretty clear indications that even now tree nesting birds are seeing the impacts from pigs, something I never thought would ever happen. But I guess that's just, we put pigs in a box thinking they can't do certain things whenever they're just a phenomenal species. Then the relationship with anthrax. And that's the map that you see there of Texas. And the reason I bring this up is that there's several things out there that pigs are very, very good reservoirs or vectors of spread and things like that. And anthrax is one of them. We do know that pigs are not susceptible to anthrax. The area that you see that's there on that map is an endemic zone of anthrax within the state of Texas. So every year we know anthrax is going to show up in that area. And the way that it typically shows its ugly head is we end up finding an animal or two dead in that given area. Well, the best thing to do to combat anthrax is that anthrax is spread by spores. And the way we do that is just to try to prevent the spread of the spores. The spread of the spores, if they're in the ground, the way we keep them in the ground is we have well-managed ground that has plenty of stubble height, plenty of grassy stubble to cover that ground, where the nose to ground contact is completely removed or significantly decreased, because there's a direct correlation in wet noses touching dry ground that has anthrax spores on it. So we go in and try to manage those properties or those locations very well to minimize that nose to ground contact. Whenever pigs come into an area that has been extremely well managed and they go in there and they cultivate that ground, then it's almost impossible to prevent that wet nose and dry ground contact there. So we have a major concern about the spread of some things that are out there just because of what pigs can do. We'll hear a lot more about that next month whenever Mike Bodenchuck talks to us a little bit more about the pig relationship with chronic wasting disease and so forth. So it's just one of those things that to bring it to your mind. It's not something to be concerned to the point of staying cooped up for the rest of your life in your house because you're worried about what pigs are going to do or what they could do. It's just, you need to be educated. You need to be mindful of what's going on out there and what you could to forward the knowledge around about the way to combat a lot of these things is just through sound education. We get the right education out there. It's something to respect, but it's not something to fear. So management infrastructure, when we start thinking about the management of the lands that we have the charge of keeping guard over, keeping watch over, we need roadways, we need levees, we need things like that in place. And we see a lot of times, especially like right now where I'm at, man, if you drop your pocket knife on the ground, you're going to lose it in the cracks of the ground. So wherever we've got a little bit of water, chances are the pigs have found it. And usually that water is going to be somewhere along a roadway crossing or something of that nature. And whenever those pigs start rooting up in that area around where that water is, then they just erode off the sides of those roadways, those gravel or dirt roads, and then we end up with a situation on our hands of some serious erosion. Compromised drainage system. So once that ground is busted up, like you see what it is there underneath that tree. If you look in the background of that tree, that's in an urban environment. You can see the sidewalk behind you, behind that tree, and then even behind that sidewalk, you can see a city street. So in some of those urban environments, when we see situations like this where those pigs had come in and decided to rearrange a really pretty St. Augustine sodded lawn, whenever they get a good runoff rain, or the landowner, the homeowner comes out and starts to really water that ground up pretty good, and then you start seeing your topsoil running down your road, the street, the side of your street gets into your drainage system of your city and so forth, then we've got some concerns with your compromised drainage systems and the purification systems and things like that. So it's something to keep in mind with regard to some of your agriculture drainages and things like that. Fencing damage, what we see typically in fencing damage is whenever we have basically, say if we're trying to fence pigs out of a riparian area along a stream side. Well, if it's a riparian area, the reason why it's called a riparian area is it's along the side of a stream. If it's along the side of the stream, obviously we have water there. So if we're trying to fence pigs out of areas that are sensitive, and it could be that riparian area, it doesn't matter. You could put it behind the security system on the national mint, and pigs are going to find a way to get in it. Okay. The same situation, you're trying to fence pigs out of nesting areas for quail and turkeys and things like that. Once they have a motivation to try to get through into that area that they're being excluded from, they're going to find a way to get in there. So make sure that in those situations where you've got those protective fences up, that you monitor those fences continuously. Just because they're a net wire fence that may be extremely well constructed, whenever you put the bulldozing head of a pig on the ground by a fence, they're going to rearrange your fences for you. The one thing to always keep in mind with regard to fences and snaring pigs, if you're using snares, unless you really like building fence, don't attach your snares to your fences. Your pigs will definitely pull your post out of the ground and rearrange your fencing to the point where you're going to get the opportunity to rebuild that fence. So other places that I've seen pigs, it's caused some damage that'll really make you change your vocabulary about, is in photo points. And in research, we use a lot of photo points when we're gauging land stewardship goals. Basically, a photo point is a small enclosure that we want the landscape to return to its full potential of production. So basically, we've got a place there that has exclusion fencing that may be the size of your dining table. And in that area, we want to see how much biomass, how much grass grows, how many wildflowers are there, what happens with productivity if we do nothing to management. What's pigs, or what's Mother Nature going to do? Then we can compare it to what's happening on the outside of that enclosure. Well, whenever pigs realize that even in a super micro setting of that small amount of square footage behind that fence is extremely highly productive, they're going to tear up your photo points. And whenever you got your photo points torn up, then that basically you have to start the whole research project over again. So that's something that's for some of y'all that are out there and you're land managers and you have to use those photo points, make sure that you keep an eye on what's going on in those points and keeping those pigs less than motivated to be there. Then for those of y'all that, again, too, we circle back around to those that are in agriculture, and you're feeding cows and so forth and so on, we're hopefully we'll get to some of this cooler weather pretty soon, and I'll be out of this 115-degree heat index in Texas, and we'll have the opportunity to feed a cow or two in the fall of the year. Well, whenever you start bouncing across the field trying to feed cows, it ain't nothing that'll empty your dashboard faster than hitting a hog wallow in a field. Whenever there's a little bit of grassy cover over a hog wallow and you hit it, chances are your auto repair guy is going to get some service out of you and get to pay a bill or two. So kind of keep your eyes on the infrastructure changes and things like that. So what we're going to do, we're going to kind of start winding down with the discussion or the content parts of these slides. So that kind of gives you a heads up to start thinking about some of the questions that you may want to put into that chat feature for us to answer at the end of it. But what we want to think about here is the water and the disease considerations. And I mean, we definitely come up with and discuss water and disease quite often. And it's something, again, too, that it's not to keep you completely terrified of what's going on out there. It's just you want to stay informed. You want to make sure that you understand what the situations are. So compromise water quality and quantity. So we go in there and we're talking about, well, how can a pig really mess with quantity? Well, if you're holding water back in an irrigation system through a levee, and they go in and mess up your levee, then you've lost your water quantity. So I know a lot of folks out in California, they have to pay quite a bit of money to buy the water that they use for irrigation systems. And those irrigation laterals are on the surface of the ground. And it may not be a very wide trench that's cut that they use to deliver the water to where you're at. And it doesn't take much for a pig to get into those water transfer canals and do a little bit of allocating of that water to your neighbors or to a creek or to a road ditch for you to lose your water quantity. Then with water quality, this is something to think about right here. Look at that picture there on the left-hand side of your screen. Now you think about that as in the form of a 5-year-old in a swimming pool at the community center. That old huzzy right there is not getting out of that pool for any reason. So whenever it comes time to wondering if she's going to dye the water a different color, yeah, that's what she's going to do. So she's not leaving that water for any reason whenever it's hot and she's found a cool spot. So the other thing to think about in that is that that people will say, well, sometimes you don't have to worry about pigs. I guess continuing to spread population in that area, because if you look at those little bitty around on the outside of that trough, there is no way that none of those pigs can ever drink out of that trough. And if that's the only water source in an area, then yeah, they'll just die of thirst. They're just going to die. They're not going to make it. We won't have to worry about pigs for very long because they can't reach the water. Well, if we were to take that picture and expand it and look at that big red sow that's propped up on that water trough, and in this picture that in an expanded form, you'll see that what that sow is doing leaned up on that water trough is she's watering those pigs on the ground under her. What she's doing in that picture there is she is snouting the water up and over the top of her head and down her back. And as she's snouting that water up and over her head, down her back, those piglets are literally drinking the water off the hocks of her legs as it runs down the ground. So these pigs are perfectly watered and may never actually ever be able to touch that water for the first year of their life. So that's a big concern with the water. We've got to think about what is that sow in the water shedding in there as far as disease concerns. What is the other species that are going to be drinking out of that water trough? So are you using that water trough for watering cattle? Because God, I hope you didn't put that in there to water pigs. So it's there for something other than a pig. And if it's there for something other than a pig, what is she adding to the punch bowl right there, if you want to call it that you probably don't want to run down your throat? So increased water temperature and dissolved oxygens, we've already talked about that. The sedimentation concerns and the other things that are there that pose some serious issues. E. coli inputs from pigs. Those of you that are out there that are land managers, what I'd like for you to do is go and locate your local watershed management plan. Every county and every parish in the United States has a watershed management plan. And in that watershed management plan, it has it isolated out by species of who the major contributors are for E. coli in the water system. Okay. And what you'll find in those pig states, the bacon belt, what we call it, is you'll find that the pigs are an extremely, extremely heavy contributor of E. coli in the natural water systems in those watersheds, as comparable to anything else. So yeah, even pigs, they'll contribute more than domestic livestock. They contribute more than just about anything that's out there. And that's something to definitely keep in mind. So moving on to the other concerns that are out there, disease wise, state of Oklahoma did some pretty good work on there, trying to locate just in that state where the disease situation sits. And they found over a couple of years study that they found up to 65 different diseases that pigs can be reservoirs for. That does not mean that every pig out there has disease. It does not mean that you're going to find any diseases at all within 100 miles. What it means is that they're capable of that. And of that capability of 65 plus diseases, about 20 of those diseases are zoonotic, which means people can get them. Okay. So we need to think about that zoonotic side of the things, and human consumptions, human interactions, and things like that. So when we think about water and water contamination, if there is the potential that's there of diseases being shed into water sources, we need to think about humans that are consuming that water out of that potentially contaminated source. We don't know what the full potential is in this area. It's something very new, but we definitely need to be mindful of that. And if you know that you've got people in the area that could be consuming water out of a water source that may be intended for livestock, there is even that much more of an increased need to make sure your water quality is there, because if people are using some of those contaminated water sources, we don't know the full ramifications of what that could mean with disease transmission and spread and things like that. So again, too, not something that we want to terrify anybody about. It's just we have to pose those questions in order to be able to be more educated about the pigs and the impacts that we see moving forward. So basically, that's going to wrap that up with regard to content and what we're going to cover tonight. Again, what we want to do is make sure that you're well aware of the September 21st webinar, noon on the east side. We're going to be at 11 a.m. here in the central part of the states and Outward Brook, and the new one is the new baby, the new Pig Brig team member is out there on the west side. It's going to be about 2 hours behind me, so it's going to be about 9 o'clock in the morning on the west coast. So what we need to do is pass this word around to our friends and their family and so forth and so on. But Mike Bodenchuk is going to have an unbelievable amount of information to convey. And if y'all are found what Dr. Grimsey did is valuable, then you're going to equally find what Mike's going to discuss valuable as well. So with that, what I'm going to do is we'll still open it back up to questions, or open it up to questions. So if you got questions, throw them in the chat feature up there. I see that there's a couple of questions in the Q&A, but Margaret and Anna Maria will help go through that and make sure that we don't miss anything with questions that y'all may have. But if you got them, now's the time to ask them.
Okay. Hey, Aaron, thanks. And one of the questions we had earlier was from Jack, and he said, our primary hunting ranch in South Texas, is there any possibility to decontaminate the surface water source, like a tank in South Texas?
It's going to be tough in just the size of the tank and so forth. I know a lot of the tanks down there, what you're talking about, they've got a drain plug on there, and it's not a bad thing every so often to be able to pull those drain plugs and just decontaminate with, you can use bleach. A lot of those decontaminations can be done just simply by using direct sunlight. Drain the tank in the morning and plug the cap off the windmill or whatever else and let the sun bake it during the daytime. And most of the time that good old vitamin D and sunlight will kill those diseases, anything that can be in there, and just cap it and let it go again. But yeah, it's one of those things that what you may want to think about doing, if it's a tank of size that's not just outrageous to even think about it, is if you're the size of basically a dining table or one of those 500-gallon water tanks or anything like that. One of the things we do in the hill country is we'll put a cattle panel over the top of that tank to keep those pigs from wallowing in it. And they may still come along in there and still drink out of that tank. Your livestock can drink out of that tank. The wildlife can drink out of that tank, but it just prevents those pigs from being able to get in that tank and wallow and directly excrete any potential disease into that water column. But cleaning them out most of the time is just as easy as draining the tank, letting the sun bake it, and then filling it right back up.
Okay, that's helpful. And then Jack, I appreciate you writing some more here. He says we cannot drain our surface tank.
Okay.
It's 7 acres plus.
Okay.
And that how do they treat the cattle that use the same water sources to make them less susceptible to diseases? And should we be concerned about the range-fed cattle transmitting diseases to humans?
I wouldn't, and I think on the cattle situation, I wouldn't worry so much about them drinking a contaminated water source, as long as you take care of the veterinary needs of vaccinations and working those animals and making sure that their body health is where they need to be. The one thing I would definitely make sure that you're mindful of, and pigs are not really the direct issue for this, is that occasionally in Texas and some of those more arid locations is we'll find from time to time blue-green algae. and blue-green algae in excess can be something that's definitely detrimental, that can happen in a short period of time. And in that situation, unfortunately, the only thing you can do is wait for runoff rainfall. So you have to fence those livestock species that's out of that area. Not much you can do about the deer on that. But if it's something the size of a 7-acre lake, then again, too, with pigs in there, unless you just absolutely have Noah's Ark worth of pigs that's coming into that 7-acre pond, you're going to have enough dilution within the water column itself that I really wouldn't worry too much about. But if you're taking care of herd health on the cattle side, you're probably taking care of 95% of everything you could do anyway.
Okay. And hey, Jack, if you've got more questions about that, I mean, feel free to type it in, but also let us
Yeah,
know.
and Jack, also too, let me know. I mean, I can put you in contact to before joining the Pig Brig family. I worked for Texas A&M for over 2 decades, and I can put you in contact with any of the livestock specialists down there, anybody that's in that realm that specifically puts boots on the ground and their shadow on your property to give you a sure enough point contact assessment of what you've got to maybe concern yourself with regard to the livestock interactions with possible diseases. But yeah, definitely something to be mindful of.
Okay, and then we've got a few questions from Erwin, and we'll get to those in just a second. Let me grab this one from Russell. It says biologists are concerned with the spread of CWD in many ways, with pigs sharing feed stations with other wildlife, whitetail, etc. Are studies underway for possible spread through saliva a pig to other wildlife?
Yeah, and that's where the concerns are coming up right now is the prion that causes the chronic wasting disease. Pigs are not susceptible to that prion, and the concern is that prions are in the soil, and the concern there is that nose to ground contact with where the prions could be is the issue of transmission potentials. So what they're trying to do is to mitigate against the spread in whitetail deer is many departments of wildlife have prohibited the feeding of a resource, maybe corn, to congregate deer to a site, because the higher congregation numbers of deer in a CWD prone location increases obviously the chance of contracting CWD or transmitting CWD. In that situation, though, with pigs not being prone to the shortcomings of CWD, then what pigs are doing with sticking their nose in the ground and moving a lot of that grain around. So say if you're at a deer feeder and you've got deer coming to an area that's congregated those animals, and pigs come through there that may have picked up prions of CWD 10 miles away, and in a drought situation they're moving ever how far they need to find nutrition, and they come to your deer feeder where you're feeding deer at, and they've got prions on their nose or in their mouth or whatever, and they pick up corn and they don't consume that corn fully and it falls out on the ground, then you've got a contaminated source of nutrition there that a deer may pick up. So they're still learning a lot about what's going on with the CWD and the way that pigs are enhancing the possibilities of CWD spread. But the main thing is that they're congregating, that deer being congregated at a very localized area is a challenge. The other thing is that pigs picking up prions that are in the ground over who knows how big of an area and bringing them to that congregation point, there still need to find out a lot more about that. But what we need to do in that situation is definitely just stay in touch with our state's Department of Natural Resources or Parks and Wildlife or Fish and Game or whatever the agency is that governs your state, and find out where the CWD is in your area. And don't necessarily wait for them to tell you what to do, but think about ways that you can even mitigate it before it ever even becomes an issue, and protect that landscape. But yeah, pigs are an issue with just being able to move those prions around without being affected by it.
Okay, and then make sure that this has been answered by Dave. Sorry, I'm going back and forth with questions, but have studies discovered the primary method of how the pigs are carrying and spreading CWD?
Well, again, we don't know the full methods of it. That if they're ingesting it and it's being passed out through feces or anything like that, or if it's just in their wallowing. If they wallow in an area that's got the prions of CWD, and then they're moving to a different area and wallowing, we don't know the full methods of that transmission yet. This is something that literally, folks, that we never heard the first syllable about pigs being affiliated with CWD until within less than the last 12 months. So this is something that is extremely new, even for our biologists, even for our land managers and things out there, our researchers, academia. This is definitely a quickly emerging issue. So we'll definitely make sure that you keep the most current information in front of you. But there's just any motive, however they pick that soil up, get it in their body, on their body, anything like that, and then they shed it out in a new environment, in a new location, something of that nature. So there's still too many out there that are unknowns. And again, this is going to just increase the importance of what Mike has to say, because again, too, Mike's presentation on the 21st of September, he's going to have a lot of that, literally hour by hour updates on what's going on with CWD in pigs, because he is the director of the whole state of Texas Wildlife Service Department. So he communicates with everybody around the country and around the world on what's going on. So it's just something to definitely keep your ear to the ground on, and we'll keep pumping the information out to you as well.
Okay, that's really helpful, Aaron. And then this may be something that would be good for the next webinar as well. But what about transmitting? Jack has got another question. What about transmitting diseases to deer which are not cared for by vets? We hunt in Live Oak County. And then he said, should we handle deer meat in any special way to prevent transmitting disease to humans?
Yeah, I mean, I know where you're at in Live Oak County. I think you're in that Alice area, Three Rivers and Alice area, if I'm correct. Not Alice, George West and Three Rivers area. But the situation with the same thing on the deer is just, you keep in mind about the deer transmission and all, is that if you've got deer get a lot of water from metabolic processes, so they're not going to have to worry quite as much about the picking things up from the deer, from the water, as much as what you may think. But the thing is out there is that, think about how you could best manage that population of deer down there to keep there from being 15, 20 deer that's piled up in any given area. Other things to think about down there too is that if you, and I know where you're at in that area, though, that hunting industry is extremely valuable, is what other kind of feeding stations could you use possibly to do with medicated feeds and all. And I will tell you this Jack, I would definitely encourage you to reach out to the experiment station there that's in Corpus Christi. They have a new deer biologist that specializes in that management of deer in South Texas. He is phenomenal. So he's not far from you, and if you're in Jim Wells County, he's in Corpus. So definitely give him a call, let him know that where you're at, and he, I'm sure, can give you a heck of a lot more specifics to your individual ranch than anything that I ever could with regard to that question.
Okay, then we've got a few from Erwin that are good thoughts, questions. I'm not sure what you can contribute to this, but Aaron, help us out with this. So to what extent are the USDA, Department of Interior, EPA, and similar state organizations working together to help protect farmland and wilderness areas? And are they offering grants and subsidies for farmers and landowners to purchase pig Brig systems? And we do have some information on this.
Yeah, and that's something to keep in mind. Is the short answer to this is yes, they are absolutely in communication, and this is something that has been a very, very pleasant improvement in the last 10 years. Probably is that many of these agencies, even complete with the CDC, Center for Disease Control, they are all at the table. They are all looking at this as now not pigs are not so much an agriculture problem or a wildland problem. They're a human issue, and that's definitely brought a lot of shingles to the same table to develop a lot of things and put them in place. So yeah, the short answer of it is there are a lot of people that's all they do day in and day out, is to make sure that we have mitigation strategies in place, that we have things ready to go. Say if there was an African swine fever outbreak in the United States, how do we jump on that and eliminate that in a very short period of time? And then the other thing is the about grants and other things being available out there. The 2018 Farm Bill presented a pretty dang good chunk of change in that Farm Bill that was dedicated specifically to pigs and pig management. And it was extended to the individual states in ways that they could decide best to manage their pig situation within their state. So whenever you look at what's being done in Texas may look completely different, and it does, to what it is in Louisiana. And literally Louisiana is 100 yards from me. So what you need to think about is in your particular state where you're at is get in touch with your soil and water conservation district, soil and water, or your state conservation authority that's there. We do a lot of work with those individual state conservation authorities to provide education. Those many of those state conservation agencies, and a growing number are putting things in place through financial assistance programs that can help landowners and so forth and so on with mitigations and education and everything of pigs. So that is definitely a huge advancement in the pig management world in the last 10 years, because so many people are talking about it. And Margaret, I know you can add some things to that as well from the number of states and places that we work with.
Yeah. No, this is good and helpful. And I know Erwin's got some good ideas here. He said, would it be possible for troops from the U.S. Army and the National Guard to be used in pig brig operations to eliminate feral pig populations in specific areas and larger zones? And
it may be something that's something in the state that you're at, is to approach some of those regulatory authorities that do have the decision making ability for that particular state, because I know that there's some efforts out there that are being very creative in how they're going to combat pig issues, and that's something to maybe pose that to somebody there in the state that you're at, is discuss that. I mean, that's I guess the thing is that keep this in mind. If you don't ask the question, the answer is always no. So ask a question, see if there's things that can happen. And it may not be that it's something that'll work for that state, but it may make the wheels start turning and something will pop up that will work.
yeah, very true. Very true. And he says 30 million would purchase 10,000 pig brig systems. And if each net captured 100 pigs annually, that's 1 million pigs, not including pigs that would be born by sows that were caught. Of course, the nets can be transferred to other areas. And has this argument been made to various authorities? Well, really, Erwin, I mean, Germany is a great example of working together and purchasing pig traps and, doing a mass trapping effort. So, Aaron,
My question is to Erwin is, do you need a job? Because that was some pretty good stuff you're spouting out right there. So that's something to definitely keep those wheels turning. I like the way you're thinking. But the thing is, Margaret is dead on. She's hitting the nail on the head there, is that you look at what, and if you didn't hear it, if you weren't able to join us for the Carl Grimsey webinar, go back and pull that up. It's June the 28th. Carl Grimsey is the leader in Germany that's over that whole country's pig control efforts, and they have done some unbelievable work at a complete country level. Now, of course, Germany is not the size of the United States, but in a concerted effort with a lot of people going in the same direction, there's a lot of good that can be done. Margaret, that's excellent stuff that he's bringing up there. But the good thing is that the wheels are rolling in a heck of a lot better direction than they were 10 years ago.
Russell said, I don't need a job, but investment options for your traps. Russell, I know we should figure that out for you for sure. So, make sure I have your email address and we'll figure it out. If you're already in our system and you're using a trap, I'm sure we have it. But it's worth investing in for sure. At least taking care of your own, problems, right, and hope that'll spread. So keep sharing about what you're doing, and hopefully that will make an impact in your area for sure.
Yeah, if you can be the steward of 10 acres, just be the best steward you can be for 10 acres, and just and maybe the efforts that you're putting out there will be observed by those around you, and good things can catch fire just like bad things can. So it's just a matter of what do you want to convey, and if you got 10 acres at your disposal, or you got 10,000, do the best you can do with what you got.
Very true. Well, you guys let us know if you need anything else and if you have any questions, but it's about that time and we really appreciate you guys being here.
Yeah, and always too, always if there's anything we can help you with, we don't have it on the screen right there, but the phone number is 833-744-2744. And you do not talk to somebody that we farm out anything to. You're going to talk to us. You'll talk to me, you'll talk to Margaret, you'll talk to Shannon or Brooke or Ryan, Randy, anybody. You're going to talk to one of the team instead of somebody that is going to funnel a call to somewhere else. So definitely let us know how we can help you, and if there's anything that we need to do to help out in your state with coming and visiting with decision makers, legislators, anything like that, definitely let us know, and we'll be glad to be a part of a solution.